Once upon a time, a few men created a document. It was a brave document that defied the dictates of a foreign ruler. Its signers boldly declared the independence of their nation, asserted their right to drive out the army of the King of England, and vowed to never again live under English rule. They based their assertions on a simple proposition of principle. It is in truth not for glory, nor riches, nor honors that we are fighting, but for freedom. For that alone which no honest man gives up, but with life itself. The Declaration, as it is now known, also rejected the divine right of kings, claiming that the rulers of their nation could be chosen by the people. The Declaration was one of the most significant events of the year 1320. The Declaration... I'm sorry, what? Oh, you thought I was thinking about something else, talking about something else. Ah, I should have specified. I'm referring to the Declaration of Arbroath, in which Scottish barons declared their independence from England in 1320. You can be forgiven for assuming I was referring to what has come to be known as the U.S. Declaration of Independence of 1776. That isn't the title of the document. Its actual title is the Unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America. Note the word United is lowercase. The United States didn't exist yet. That similar but much later document certainly does declare that 13 British colonies in the Americas ought to be free and independent states. Note the plural of states there. Mostly, though, that document is a declaration of grievances, complaints about a lack of legal due process that are similar to some devolution debates in the United Kingdom that have occurred over the past few centuries. But yes, the rest of the U.S. Declaration is similar to the Declaration of Arbroath. Similarity is a theme worth exploring. The U.S. Declaration was a brave document that boldly declared the independence of their nation. There's no question that the document was a significant event of great historical significance. It was a major step toward launching the American experiment, building a nation based not on shared ethnicity or heritage, but on a set of ideas. But we need to extract the truth about the U.S. Declaration from the mythology that has been constructed around it. The U.S. Declaration was a unique document in the annals of history, but unique in what way? The sentiments and stated principles of the U.S. Declaration were not unique. The Declaration of Arbroath asserted the same 456 years earlier. The Declaration of Grievances in the U.S. document were appealing to rights granted 561 years earlier by the Magna Carta and coded into law in 1689 as the English Bill of Rights. The rest of the U.S. Declaration's text was based largely on John Locke's theory, published in 1689, that government is a convenience and nobles have a right to change kings if the king doesn't live up to the social contract. Those four sources are just the most prominent of the many philosophical and legal resources on which the writers of the U.S. Declaration drew for their inspiration. The document was unique in its emergence in a particular time and place, but not in its thinking and principles, all of which had been long established as a dissent against the abuses of power. Instead of celebrating a false sense of American exceptionalism, we can celebrate the reality that the U.S. Declaration was another small step in the trend toward increasing circulation of power away from right-wing concentrations of power. It would be wrong to say that the U.S. Declaration was fully left-wing, but it was another step in the long, slow arc toward increased freedom and social justice. We should also be honest about the reality that the U.S. Declaration was a statement of a fact that already existed. The colonies were already de facto separated from Great Britain. King George III had already officially declared the colonies in rebellion, and each colony already had devolved governments, with multiple colonies already taking steps toward legal separation from Britain. The U.S. Declaration was a diplomatic ploy to secure foreign assistance, strongly reminiscent of the Declaration of Arbroath that appealed for foreign support against England. The 1776 ploy was eventually successful when circumstances favored an extension to the colonies of an existing state of war against Britain. Central to the mythology about U.S. history is the portrayal of the underdog and fiercely independent American patriots who fought a revolutionary war to overthrow a tyrant and win liberty. This myth's central narrative of American individualism triumphing over foreign tyranny is a simplistic whitewash of the complexities of the geopolitics of the 1770s. Here is a brief sketch of what was going on at the time the American colonies were contemplating separating from Britain. Britain had been at war off and on with Spain, France, and other European states for the entire 1700s. These wars included two that could be considered world wars before World War I because battles were fought across multiple continents and oceans. The 7 Years' War's North American theater of operations is also known as the French and Indian War of 1754 to 1763, a war in which many of the eventual officers of the colony's Continental Army fought, most notably George Washington. The 7 Years' War nearly bankrupted Britain, and it turned to taxing the American colonists. Britain justified the burden, claiming that by winning the war, they saved the colonists from the French and their Indian savage allies. And yes, worth noting, the U.S. Declaration also complains about the, quote, merciless Indian savages. The French were expelled from Quebec, but the Indian nations that had allied with the French continued to threaten the western frontier of the northern colonies. British attempts to secure the frontier strained the colonies and angered many of the colonists who felt Britain was making them pay too heavy a price in its now Cold War with France. That anger directly led to the outbreak of war and the declaration of grievances. France, in maintaining its side of the Cold War with Britain, was clandestinely assisting the growing separatist movement in the colonies with financial and material support. France had a strong interest in weakening British power in the Americas, but was reluctant to openly back the colonies. France was in active negotiations with colonial separatist leaders before and during the U.S. Declaration, a document intended to win open French support for the separatist cause. On February 6, 1778, encouraged more by separatist military victories than by the U.S. Declaration, France signed a military alliance with the separatists against Britain that included a promise to recognize an independent United States. Naval support from the French and later from Spain and the Dutch states indicted the British Navy and helped the American separatists defeat the British Army. The Revolutionary War was not a revolution, but a war of secession, assisted by opportunistic enemies of Britain. The British government was not overthrown, but a colony gained independence. The British correctly referred to it as the American War of Independence, the world's first colonial war of independence. Besides the technicality of the result, the war needs to be understood in the larger geopolitical context. Hostilities in the Americas were to a large extent a continuation of the wars Britain fought with the French, Spanish, and Dutch throughout the 1700s. Then there's the myth that implicitly or explicitly lionizes the American patriot, the Minutemen who fought for their country's liberty from British tyranny. The myth is selectively defining patriot. The myth conveniently forgets that a significant portion of the colonial population were loyalists to the British Crown, who opposed the push for secession, and even fought with the British Army. In a sense, the War of Secession was also a civil war. The myth is also selectively defining for the 1770s what country meant. For the Loyalists, they were the patriots, defending their country, Great Britain, from traitors. The Loyalists had the law and tradition on their side, which is why the U.S. Declaration appealed to a moral authority higher than the law. It is worth noting that the Declaration appeals not to the Christian God, but to the laws of nature and of nature's God. An example of the myth's selectivity can be found in perhaps the inventor of that myth, Thomas Paine. Paine was arguably one of the most successful propagandists in history. His incendiary pamphlet, Common Sense, became a major encouragement of separatist feelings in the American colonies. But Paine's argument for rebellion against the king was a tradition already established in England, not the Americas. Because of his writings demanding rebellion against King George III, Paine is considered one of the great heroes of the American myth. The myth insists that Paine was a patriot for love of his country. In his high-powered rhetoric, Paine bemoaned the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot, and demanded that no one shrink from the service of his country. It's necessary to point out that Paine was not American. He was born in England and wrote Common Sense less than 2 years after he arrived in the American colonies as an immigrant. If the myth-believing right-wingers can accept that Paine, being then a recent immigrant, can claim the U.S. as his country and can call him a great patriot, why do they deny other recent immigrants a right to a similar claim? Also worth noting the contrast to Paine of American-born William Franklin, the acknowledged extramarital son of Benjamin Franklin and governor of the colony of New Jersey. The younger Franklin was loyal to King George III and organized armed resistance to the secessionists when his country was, by birth, the province of Pennsylvania. I admit I'm raising more questions than I'm providing answers. Whose country was it? Who were the patriots? And I haven't even touched the questions of the motivations of the signers of the U.S. Declaration. Were they really driven by high principles or by more base motives? History is complicated, and the birth of the United States deserves critical consideration rather than simplistic myths that are little more than children's stories about impossibly impeccable heroes. Next, I will address one of the U.S.'s most absurd and damaging myths.